Okay, we are slowly, very slowly, going along. I hope nobody's in a hurry, because when you get to where you're going, basically you haven't changed anything. So going and returning the same place, movement and stillness, one source. So whether we go deeply into one verse or we rush through them, whether we chew it and absorb them is the only difference. And some of you are saying, we're chewing on this a long time. But there's a lot here. So let's just start. I'm looking at maybe possibly 3 verses tonight. And it starts in your text, if one can look upon this world. I'm not sure what page that is. Anybody? Page 11?
The second verse.
How's that?
Second verse.
Second verse. And we're also working on retranslating this as we go along. So if anybody spots anything, especially that it doesn't either correspond to the Chinese or isn't a really good translation of the Chinese, we're going to make notes of that. Somebody's penciling in that, and then we're going to try to polish this over time. Heng Sure is doing a similar thing, but he's way down the line. I think he's into the 10 grounds already, and we're just starting on chapter 9. So, on the other hand, if you think I'm going too slow, you can, on tomorrow night, tune into Heng Shure's online, and you'll jump to the chapter 39. So you can try to go back and forth. But one of the things I want to maybe introduce to you to, we are all of us, you included, by your questions and coming here and asking and helping, translating these texts into different languages. Certainly English is a target language that we're aiming at for this. And in translation jargon, they talk about source language, target language. The source language here, at least for us, is this Chinese text. The target language immediately is English, and eventually will be other languages as well. When translate, some people do something that's called literal or formal equivalence. In other words, they just take it word for word. And there's almost no changes to loosening that up. You get a literal translation, almost dictionary-ese. Sometimes that works to convey something very raw, but often it doesn't, because we're using the concept of equivalence. There has to be some equivalence in the target language that matches what was there in the source language. You know what I'm saying? So if it's clear in Chinese and we just do it word for word in English, it may not be equivalent at all. It may be just a literal, and usually when that happens, something goes clunk when you hear it. It doesn't, like we just gave the example of the way I. That was a literal translation. Someone will accomplish and achieve the way I. That goes clunk in English. It doesn't make it. So then we have to go, so they have something that's also called more idiomatic equivalence, where you have idioms that mean different things and you try to equivalent that. Then there's something called functional equivalence, that it produces the same functioning result. And then there's something called dynamic equivalence, which is really starting to get at the, how should I say it, the moving spirit of the text, not just the letter. That's dynamic equivalence. I'm going to be so bold as to introduce a new concept that isn't out there yet. It's always fun to do because you guys are pretty friendly. In academia, they may roast me, but that's okay. I'm 73 and I'm not so good to eat roasted anymore. I'm going to call it therapeutic equivalence or transformative equivalence. But by that I mean, if we accept the idea that these texts are, in fact, by design and purpose, meant to be transformative spiritual documents that work on us and our psyche, and are not just passing along information, but passing along methods and stimulation for transformation, then the translation has to somehow bring out that therapeutic thrust. It has to work on us in such a way as to say, wow, not only do I think I know what it means, but I'm getting a feeling it's asking me to be different in some way as a result of encountering the text. And if we can do that with these, not all texts are that way, but I think these texts as spiritual documents and as texts were designed to convey an impulse, an impetus to change, to become different, then the translation has to, when you're done reading it, you feel a little itch or urge to be different than you were before in a positive way. And that's what I mean by therapeutic. Now, I borrowed this concept from a Western philosopher that some of you know called Pierre Hadot. And Hadot basically makes a point that early Western philosophy was largely not to just inform, but to form and transform. And that there was a student-teacher relationship between the philosopher and the student that not only gave the information, but more importantly, imparted to the student a set of spiritual contemplations and exercises that made them different in the world. And their whole view of the world changed, and their whole idea of what it meant to be a person changed as a result of what he called doing philosophy as opposed to just studying or reading philosophy. So I thought Hadot's idea of Western philosophy is very appropriate to these texts, these Buddhist texts, because really what this is about is doing Buddhism rather than just studying it. And what does it mean to do it? It means basically to change greed, anger, and stupidity into enlightenment. And so the thrust of this, then I'm thinking of translation, when you go away, there should be that extra flavor of a therapeutic equivalence, a kind of medicinal effect on you, like an adjustment from a chiropractor or something. Oh, okay, I'm squared again. I feel better. Or I feel troubled, but troubled in a therapeutic way. Because part of these texts are meant to trouble us. I'm sorry, they're not meant to be like a massage, except if you go to Chinese massage. Somebody asked me if I wanted a Chinese massage. Oh, yeah, I love a Chinese massage. Well, a Chinese massage is torture. You don't understand. It's called tuina. And, you know, I've had other massages. You go, la, la, the music's playing, the oil's flowing, la, la. You go to a Chinese person, yeah, ah, and you're screaming, and they say, oh, good, good, good. You know? So these texts are sort of like a Chinese massage in some ways. They're going to hit points and rub you in ways that are a little uncomfortable. So I won't go so far to say what my Chinese masseuse said, no pain, no gain, because I'm not sure I buy into that as an overarching concept, but certainly that's something she believed in. And if you measure it that way, I gained a lot, because there was a lot of pain. In any event, so what I'm saying, when we pay attention to the translation here and you make notes, not only ask yourself, first of all, is there some literal equivalence? We don't want to take too much license and just render it in smooth English and don't look at the original, because then we will miss the letter, and if we miss the letter too widely, we'll also miss the spirit. However, once we get past a literal, more go into the dynamic and the functional equivalence, and I would say the next level, the therapeutic. So that when someone reads this text in English for the first time, they will get a flavor of some kind of moving, motivated, dynamic energy here that is asking them to think and be different and change and reflect and so forth, and not simply reading abstract lines that are mystical and beyond reach. That being said, I don't think we'll ever get with these texts to the point where there isn't some commentary or shared inquiry going on here to do that. Even with the best translations, just some of this is just necessary to unpack in a living tradition, time and time again, generation after generation. And so that's partly what I am heir to with my teachers, but also partly what you're heir to if you're going to pass this on to somebody else. So it requires an infusion of study and practice in your own life experience to open up the meaning of these texts. It can't simply be linguistics, philology, or even belief, faith-based. It has to be something more. I sometimes compare it to if you have tea leaves. The sutras are like tea leaves. They've been dried and they've been taken down to this very concise, dried form. But if you want to know what the tea tastes like, you have to infuse it with hot water again, steep it and brew it, and then you drink it. Ah, that's what it's like. So part of the good translation and then part of the commentary should be the adding of the hot water to the tea leaves to make it come alive and fresh again. Anyhow, these are things we wrestle with when we do translation. So let's jump into this text here. And of course, this is the first early English translation. I believe this was probably done in the 70s. Heng Sure and I were talking about this just yesterday, but I'm guessing it was done in the early 70s. And we have, if one can look upon this world with a mind that is unmoving and see Buddhas and living beings as the same, then such a one will accomplish supreme wisdom. If with regard to, and I've changed the to a, just a simple preposition, if with regard to a Buddha and the Dharma, one's mind is completely level and equal, and the two thoughts do not arise, then one will realize a position which is hard to conceive of. Clunk, clunk, it's okay. I mean, you realize a position which is hard to conceive of really is not English. I mean, you can get into reading this and you forget that you're not really doing translation here. And also, such a one will, we talked about that too, it's way too formal and stiff. That person will realize the highest wisdom. That's just a retranslation of that fourth line on the first verse. That person will realize, the highest wisdom. That to me is more English than such a one will accomplish. Okay. So in these texts, although they seem pretty formal in this way, really what's buried in here, and I was saying this last week, there's some really key concepts that we need, our takeaways on this. This one has to do really with the idea of non-duality. And you'll see it in the lines, see Buddhas and living beings as the same, that third line. And then with regard to a Buddha and Dharma, one's mind is level and equal and doesn't make these two distinctions between the two. So I'm just going to tease out that. There's lots here, but I want to tease out maybe a little bit about that. Because non-duality is often presented as something very abstract and metaphysical, when in fact, it's just basically saying the potential for Buddhahood is right within this, within me, within you. Within a living being, there's a potential for Buddha. Even though they seem like two, they're basically one substance along a continuum. And the Dharma and a Buddha, or a teacher and the teachings, are also one and the same. They are different manifestations of a similar thing. So that being the case, what this does is it makes it much more accessible. So in a sense, let's go with the second line, the second passage, and I changed it to a Buddha rather than the Buddha, because you'll see the first passage says, if one sees Buddhas and living beings. It doesn't say if one sees the Buddha. So what this basically is saying, by changing it to you're making it universally available. All living beings have this Buddha nature, all can become Buddhas. If you say the Buddha, you're talking about one individual at a historical time and place, and that then removes it from the ongoing human here and now. So by just changing it to a Buddha, we open that up. In a sense, what this is saying is, we hear and read the Dharma through text. That's the Dharma. And you're looking at a text. But we know and absorb the Dharma through embodiment, through the person, through the human. So you have the text and you have the human. You have the Buddha and you have the Dharma. But what it's saying is you need both of these to realize, to make it real. So you have the text, and we hear the text, we read the text. That's what's called the received tradition. It's passed along textually. But for the received tradition to come alive, you need the inspired tradition. You need the Buddha, the teachers, the living community where this is brought into life. That's the inspired tradition. So the received tradition and inspired tradition are just two sides of the same coin, but you need both. And that's what it's saying, if you can see the Buddha and the Dharma level and equal, meaning they're one and the same, and you don't make this distinction, then you are on the way to achieving something real. It presents it as realize what's hard to conceive of, but basically you have made it real. You've made it accessible. One of the lines that's used literally in the text is talking about the practice of giving and of the gifts that one could give. The text, this is the Avatamsaka, says that the highest gift is the gift of Dharma. You can give material things, you can give fearlessness, you can give kindness, but giving of Dharma gives something that actually can liberate at the deepest level of suffering. But it says the highest gift of Dharma is to actually, this is Chinglish of course, manifest body, speak Dharma. I don't know what the anybody know the 4 characters of that? It's something Shan Shuofa. Huh? Good, 4 characters. Manifest body, speak Dharma. That's Chinglish, by the way. So what this means is you speak through embodiment. You teach through embodiment. In other words, you cultivate, you live and cultivate the Dharma into a body. So you manifest a body, speak the Dharma, but that can only happen if you live and you cultivate the Dharma into your body, into your mind, into your feelings, into your emotions. So you, in a sense, you become a sutra. But you become a living, breathing, walking sutra. A living, breathing, walking sutra. Now, some of you know Fahrenheit 451? No, yes. Who knows Fahrenheit 451? What's the theme? Who's going to go once, go twice?
Book burning.
Book burning, okay. So they're burning books. We won't say why they're burning books, but an authoritarian structure doesn't want people thinking, so they literally burn the books. Now they'd have to burn a lot more, but let's say they're burning the books. And it's called Fahrenheit 451 because?
That's the temperature.
That's the temperature that books ignite by. Not 450 is too low, you have to have 451. And then in this novel, the fire trucks and the fire station job is to go around not putting out fires, but starting them. So any place there's a library books, they go out and they burn the books. Okay, so this is a sci-fi dystopian kind of novel. There's a group of people who are resisting this. So what do? They memorize the classics. And each person memorizes particular classics. So when they're gathering in the remote areas where they're being pursued because they are lovers and passers on of this literary tradition, they're sitting around the fire and says, oh, this is Shakespeare, this is Kant, this is Nietzsche, this is Plato. And it's like, what? Why are you giving them the names? Because they've memorized those works. So then the person just starts reciting Shakespeare. So that's their job. They keep the libraries alive by memorizing. So I'm just suggesting here you become a sutra. you memorize a text, or you memorize a passage of a text. And I'm saying that's the first step to actually becoming the sutra. And that's where you have to get the transformative translation, because memorizing the text alone is maybe necessary, but it's not sufficient. You then have to embody it and really understand so that everything you say, do, and think manifests the principles of that text. That's pretty cool. And in fact, I would argue that's the intent of the text. The intent of the text is not to worship them, put them in libraries, or to print them down in microforms and wear them around your neck or hang them from your mirror in your car is good luck. The purpose of these texts is to be eaten. And I mean this metaphorically, not literally eaten. I don't know if there's any nutritional value for eating text, sorry. But there is a spiritual value of absorbing them so that you actually become the spirit and the letter and the energy of that teaching. I mean, just think a teaching of kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. These are the things that you then put forth. So the text becomes you, you become the text. I think that's when it's saying do not have these two thoughts of the difference between them. Hui Neng, the sixth patriarch, says something very interesting. He says, someone asked him, what does it mean to to uphold a sutra? And a lot of times this gets translated as reciting it from memory. To trudging to uphold a sutra. Dharma Master Sure, the Buddhist nun organization, Heng Sure, it's the same Sure. It means to maintain and uphold. So some people translated it as you uphold it, you guard and protect it, and you keep it in the library safe. So other people say, no, you actually memorize it to uphold it. But Huineng has a different translation. He says, regarding the Diamond Sutra, the Vajra Sutra, he says, good and wise friends, if you can cultivate a mind that does not cling to anything inside and outside, that comes and goes freely, such a mind that can get rid of all grasping, gains unhindered understanding. This is what it means to be one and same with the Diamond Sutra. So he's not just saying memorize it. He says if you can live it, if you can cultivate a mind, a heart that doesn't cling to anything outside or inside, not seeking anything, completely unattached, unbound, liberated, that comes and goes freely, responding to conditions, according to conditions, not changing, but according to conditions, such a mind gets rid of all grasping and gains complete, perfect understanding. That's what it means to be one and the same with the Diamond Sutra. Whoa. Okay, so this is moving the envelope a little further. That's why I'm saying, unless we translate it therapeutically, you won't get the flavor that it's supposed to have for you. It won't come across. My teacher, I can remember one evening in the early days, somebody had brought in some wonderful statuary and icons, and the master accepted them. But he said, you should understand that I've come to America not to make icons and statues of clay and wood and bronze, but to make flesh and blood and bone sages, Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. It's like, what? I want to make living flesh and blood Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, not just the icons. And again, to me, that is a rendering of the therapeutic transmission or translation of the text. So he comes, he basically only has Chinese and we have English, and we're working to translate, but he's reminding us at the same time, the goal is not to bring the text only into the English or American idiom. The idea is actually to bring the living spirit, the presence of living Buddhas and Bodhisattvas right into the American Western fabric. And he said, when it's really deeply embedded in the American Western fabric, then it goes back to Asia again. And it just keeps going. We recycle. But in that recycling, there's an incredible transformation going around. So then, we're sitting in the audience and who are the flesh and blood? Where are they going to come from? And you realize he's talking to us. And then it gets a little more difficult. If he's talking about somebody else, we'd say, well, we're going to wait for them to come. If the pressure was on us. So that's why when he was teaching us, it wasn't just to learn the text, to study the text, be informed about the text, but it was actually to transform ourselves. And that got down to actually transforming all of our bad habits and faults. Because as I explained last week, when you see these as non-dual and you realize, okay, so living beings are Buddhas, that would mean that Buddhas come from living beings. And they can only come from living beings if living beings get rid of their bad habits and faults. So it's not like mystical, you get enlightened. It's actually you just clean up, keep cleansing until there's nothing left to remove. And that's what I think he says. Here the patriarch says you get rid of all grasping and you're not hindered anymore. That's it. If we go on here and we read the next verse, if there is someone who sees the Buddha, and I would change that, a Buddha and living beings as level and equal and peacefully dwelling, yet without dwelling and without a place of entering, that person will become one who's difficult to encounter. Okay, again, the last line, become one who's difficult to encounter. Just a really rare individual. Okay. This one continues the same theme. You'll see above you have living beings and Buddhas non-dual, then you have Dharma and Buddha non-dual, that's the second verse, and now you have, again, living beings and Buddhas as same, but now you're also saying that they are basically coming from the same place, the same experience. So living beings and Buddhas are non-dual. When Heng Sure and I began our bowing pilgrimage, this was a text that we started with, and often our teacher would give us instructions, both personally on how to do the bowing pilgrimage, how to have the right mind and also how to do it physically, which we thought we understood and we didn't. I could tell many stories about that. But had the right frame of mind to do the bowing. And he said, you're bowing to try to help make the world peaceful and to help eliminate disasters and calamities that either are coming right now or will come. And so he said, but in order to do that, you have to then remove the disasters and calamities from your own mind. It's like, yeah, there will be disasters and calamities outside. Yes, there's war and violence outside. But really, if you think you're going to remove that, the only way you're going to even touch it is to get rid of it in your own mind and heart. So quickly, the emphasis on the teaching came back to cultivating the inner aspect of this. I'll quote you some of his teachings. He says, you're bowing, first of all, to cross over the living beings of your own nature. That's the first thing. You're bowing away your big self by bowing to all living beings. So you're reducing you as the measure of everything, and basically by bowing and reflecting and eliminating your false thoughts and your bad habits and so forth, and being really honest and humble about that, in a sense, what you're doing is crossing over the own living beings of your nature, and you're also breaking the distinction down because you're special and living beings are just ordinary. You're crossing over your own living beings to start with. And then he said, bowing to all living beings is the same as bowing to all Buddhas. Now you see how this translates from this text. You see this line in the text, see living beings, Buddhas, level and equal. Now he's bringing it back to the existential where he says, you're not understanding. All living beings, not just people, all sentient creatures are potentially Buddhas. And by bowing to them, you are bowing to all Buddhas. And to bowing to all Buddhas means to be reverent and respectful and bowing to all living beings. So the non-dual aspect is completely broken down on this, because it's very easy to enter a space where I come to the monastery temple, I bow to the Buddhas and so on and so forth, but ordinary people are a real pain. I mean, it's really, get rid of them or push them away, or I don't want to deal with living beings, I just want to deal with the elite enlightened. And in fact, what this text is telling us, there is no distinction between these two. Buddhas began as common, ordinary living beings with all the afflictions. And people have the potential for complete, perfect enlightenment by cultivating through all those afflictions. And so it's just a difference of time and practice rather than one of substance. And then he said, it's just that a Buddha has become awakened and living beings are still confused. The enlightenment and confusion are different, but the living beings and Buddha are the same. This is, part of the instructions we got. The Buddha is replete with great wisdom, and living beings are replete with foolishness and afflictions. So he said, and this came up constantly, stop your judgmentalism. Stop constantly judging and criticizing and fault-finding everybody else. And he actually gave us a verse at that time. Truly recognize your own faults and shortcomings. Don't blab and discuss the faults and shortcomings of others. Other shortcomings and faults are just my own. Being one with everyone is called great compassion. And this is because at that time, at least in the monasteries there was a lot of gossip. I know there's a virus going around now, but the virus at that time was the gossip virus. And everybody had it. And even if they took a vow of silence, they were doing it in their minds. You could be there, you could just feel it. Everybody was just looking and comparing and contrasting and judging and finding fault. And there wasn't, I don't think, a day that went by that the master didn't just hit us again and again and stop your fault finding, stop your looking outside like that. You're completely covering over your own faults. You think you're better because you can find faults in others, but that finding faults in others and covering your own is the biggest fault, and so on and so forth. And it had to be said again and again and again. So here I think the pragmatic aspect of these verses, of the non-dual between Buddhas and living beings, is basically just see all living beings as potential Buddhas, including yourself, and work to elevate that rather than to create a false distinction that somehow I'm better because I can spot somebody else's faults. There's a wonderful passage from Hui Neng that I'll read on this because that was a text we did before, but I want to tie the Platform Sutra to the Avatamsaka because I feel personally that the Avatamsaka Sutra is completely contained within the Platform Sutra, and the Platform Sutra is completely contained within the Avatamsaka. These are just different ways of saying the same thing. But here's very pragmatic advice. When one takes refuge, sometimes you recite these 4 vows. Taking refuge means you make a formal ceremonial commitment to become a Buddhist, and usually involved with that is making the 4 vows and then sometimes taking the 5 precepts. Nowadays they modify, you take 2 of the 5, 3 of the 5. I can take 4 of the 5, can't take the 5th. And it's like, okay, that 5th is the one that's going to keep you from Buddhahood. 4 won't get you there. You got to have all 5. This is like, anyhow. But as they say in Chinese, man man zhou. Slowly, slowly go. If you can take 1, that's a good start. But don't rest content with 1, you know. Anyhow, one of the 4 vows is that living beings are boundless. I vow to liberate them all, right? Zhongsheng Wuliang Shiyan Du, right? Yeah. And so Hui Neng, in his teaching where he does the therapeutic equivalence, he says, what is that talking about? Is it talking about you're Don Quixote and you're going off to save all the world's living beings? Maybe. But really what it's about, he says, it's about your own living beings. And so this is how his line goes. He says, you vow to liberate limitless living beings where? And then he adds this little phrase, of your own mind. Now that's not in the vow. So living beings are boundless. In my own mind, I vow to liberate them all. Afflictions, your afflictions are endless. I vow to help you with them. No, the afflictions of my own body and so forth. So he internalized. This is called the mind ground teaching. He says, but what does that mean, the living beings of my own mind? It does not mean that I, Hui Neng, liberate them. Oh, this is where it gets a little uncomfortable if you're in the assembly because you came to take refuge with the triple truths of great Hui Neng and you're just saying, like, take me across, row the boat, deliver me. And Hui Neng saying, no. You want me to eat lunch for you? No, you're going to have to eat yourself. Good and wise friend, the living beings within your own mind are the deluded thoughts, deceitful and untrue thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, jealous thoughts, malicious thoughts. Woo, very concrete. Fortunately, we don't have any of those, so we can move on to, no. So you just look at those deluded thoughts, deceitful thoughts, untrue thoughts. And it doesn't just mean thoughts, it means before you actually do something deceitful and untrue, there's a thought brewing that then turns into maybe a word that manifests that, and then even an embodiment of it. And even if you don't say it, you can manifest deceitful and untrue thoughts in 100 different ways of just the way you present yourself to other people, what you cover over, what you don't say. This is really getting down to it. Unwholesome thoughts, competition, jealousy, malicious thoughts, wishing evil and harm to others. All mental states like these are living beings, he says. I want to repeat. All mental states like this are living beings, and each must be liberated within your own nature. Wow, this is true liberation. And what does it mean to liberate yourself through your own essential nature? It means liberating the living beings of your wrong views, the afflictions and delusions within your own mind by using right views. And once you have right views, you use the wisdom of Prajna to lay bare and untangle your mistaken, confused, deluded living beings. He's actually giving a medicinal surgical procedure here. This is how you're going to do it. You're going to do surgery on yourself. You're going to untangle, lay bare, take it out, clean it up. You yourself liberate each and every one. Whoa. You say, well, that's Mahayana Buddhism. No, it's actually Theravada Buddhism too. No one saves you but yourself. No one can, no one may. You must walk the path. Buddhas only show the way. That's the Dhammapada. And it's the same thing here. Each one of you must liberate your own. When falseness occurs, liberate it with truth. When confusion arises, liberate it with awakening. When delusion sets in, liberate it with wisdom. And when evil takes hold, liberate it with goodness. Liberation like this is true liberation. And then this wonderful line, which goes back to the verses we read in the Avatamsaka tonight. Good and wise friends, unawakened Buddhas, I said, what? Unawakened Buddhas are just living beings. At the moment they awaken, however, living beings are a Buddha. Therefore, you should realize that the 10,000 dharmas are all within your own mind. And then, I love this line. This, to me, takes it from the Tang Dynasty to my own experience with my own teacher, which was, we're studying this wonderful text in the Tang Dynasty, and it was then, there, blah, blah, and it was spoken here, and so forth. A lot of text analysis is done with that kind of historical placement. And here, Wei Nung says very directly, he says, why don't you immediately, right within your own mind, see the true reality of your nature? So this text jumps out. He said, well, he's talking to them now. But actually, if you read the text correctly, he's saying, why don't you, right now, here at the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery on Friday night on March, whatever it is, immediately see the true mind of your own nature? Wow. This is something my teacher used to do. I was explaining, he traveled around a lot, so when he was away, we used to kind of get lax. He just got lax. There was, being around a good teacher is like being in a sauna where you can't open the door and you don't control the temperature. So just the heat is on. And that's because there's no time to waste. So on the area of your character flaws and shortcomings and so forth, the heat pressure goes up and they start to arise. And so this is the living beings of your own nature. And so often what he would do when he would arrive, he would just sort of come up to you and go, hey, zamayang. That means literally, what's up? What's up? But it wasn't like, what's up, what are you doing? It was like, where are you at right now? Where are your living beings? Are you crossing them over? Who's in charge? Is your body in charge? Is your mind in charge? What are you really thinking? Why are you hiding that? But it was all like in just one expression. It's just the eye contact. Zamayang, what's up? And you realized, oh my God, he's not talking about the ordinary thing. He's really going right to that state. And this was wonderful and painful simultaneously. I mean, you would die to get it, and you feel you died from getting it. It was that kind of bittersweet tension. And he would do it in such a way as to bring you right back to this, why don't you right now see what's going on with your own mind? All the stuff that you're doing is a manifestation. It's a wheel spinning outside this core. It's the core you need to attend to because that's the king, that's the boss. And you often forget that and just get caught up in all the things you're doing, thinking they're really important or there's something in particular, without knowing that these are just manifestations of the mind and its movement and how it's working. So he would bring you back in a very contemplative way, but not abstract contemplation, to the here and now. Where are you right now? And where you are right now is where your future is going to be as well. Because what you're doing right now with your body and your emotions is setting the ground for what's going to result next. And if you're not in charge of it, then you're not in charge of what's coming. And you're thinking about the future is useless because you're not attending to the now, the present, and so forth. So this was the kind of, and therefore, like past, present, and future just sort of left. And all you knew was right now, this is all that matters. Just like when you're doing meditation, it's one thought, looking at that one thought after thought kind of thing. So I was saying this is always difficult, and I was saying this last week. So when he would come, he had a golf cart he would drive around. As he got older and his legs weren't as strong, so someone gave a golf cart. And so when you saw this little white yellow golf cart, you knew that the master was here. So we were all kind of like, yeah, chilling, hanging out, cultivating, going to the ceremonies, lunchtime, jiaozi, good dumplings, And all of a sudden you see the white golf cart and you go, uh-oh. It's like the mice, the cat's here. And so then suddenly the whole monastery became almost like a ghost town. It was amazing. Everybody's around. All of a sudden, very few people were around. Where's everybody? It was because the golf cart's moving around. And so people would actually go and hide in their rooms or try to get busy with something. And the master thought this was really funny. He says, it's called the City of 10,000 Buddhas, but I can't even find 10 people. Where's everybody? And so sometimes we have the lecture and it'd be he'd say, go to the rooms, knock on the doors, get them here. And then everybody would come in, and thus would begin the sauna, would turn up, and we'd get some teachings. And so after a while, this would go on for 3 or 4 days, and then, you know, you were really in that energy. And then it came time for him to go, so the golf cart put away. He'd get in a regular car, ready to go, and we'd all put our palms together and bow and see him go through the gate, and we'd all go, whew. Now, it's sort of like, we miss you, but that pressure was off. So what I'm suggesting here is transforming that, doing that is really difficult, because there's something in the ego that resists this, that just wants to be lazy and laid back. And so having a good community, having a text like this that keeps the pressure going, holding the precepts regularly, keeping some spiritual practice, in a way, this is the Dhamma Vinaya. It's the teacher after the teacher's gone. And even if we don't have the advantage of having that kind of teacher now, the teachers himself pointed to these texts and to these practices as the thing that would keep the heat on. And so it's really important to recognize what these are about. They're not just devotional practices. They're not even reverential kinds of exercises. They're really self-transformative medicine. And they should be rubbing us a little bit. And so my teacher would also say, the understanding that we're talking about here is a visceral transformative understanding. It's not just an intellectual. He said your understanding is only superficial and you only have a sketchy idea of it. You still don't truly comprehend until you change, until you actually change and you become the teaching. If you really truly want to understand, you have to cultivate. And then he said to me, because I tended to be more academic and thought I understood by getting the concepts. And he said to me, Go Ting, if you have to think about it, it's too late. I was like, what? He says, your right thought, being right in thought, you're apart from thought. Your first thought is your true thought. This is to be cultivated completely. If you give a thought to it, you're already too late. So it has to be so second nature, so habituated at this point, that you don't even have to think about it. He says, what do you think free and easy means? It means you're free and easy. It doesn't mean you can do anything you want. It means whatever you want to do is right on. Therefore, you can follow your heart's desires, if you want to use that expression, without making mistakes, because you cultivated to that purity of purpose inside that you don't even have the opportunity or the possibility of giving rise to that sort of deviant move at that point. That's what that cultivation level is being talked about. That's what embodiment's talking about. So every time I'd have an answer, I'd say, I think it's this, I think it's that. Think. It's not about thinking. You either have it or you don't. You either see it or you don't. And then he says, right thought, you're apart from thought. You think but have no thought. I said, that's really hard. He says, Donran, if it was easy, everybody'd be a Buddha. So what I'm suggesting here is not like you just respond impulsively, but you cultivate to the smallest of places. You cultivate to the deepest where your impulses and thoughts first arise, and you get that straight. Once that is straight, it starts to work its way out again, and you can trust it. But it means in the process of cultivation, you have to go down to the deepest. I'll just share this one passage tonight that I like. And this is from Confucius. And there's 2 translations of this. But I think when the texts say you understand this through cultivation, not just through intellect, this is a shared kind of understanding that comes from these traditions, that learning consisted of both textual, intellectual understanding, but also self-transformative self-cultivation. This is what's meant, for example, in a Confucian text, the Dashui, a Ming Ming De. It means you radiate intellectually and personally with virtue and understanding. Virtue and understanding. You're a really good moral person, and you really are sharp. The sharpness without the moral can be a very dangerous weapon, as we're discovering more and more in the world. But just the moral without the acuity of seeing things as they are tends to be unformed. It tends to be rather naive. You need both of them hand in hand. So this is from Confucius, where he gives this wonderful passage. He says, at 15, when I was 15 years old, he said, I bent my mind on learning. I aspired to learn in this way, to become really knowledgeable and to become really good. So that's what happened at 15. So this is we compare ourselves, and you think, where was I at 15? Okay. He says, at 30, I stood firm. He said, at 30, another translation, I found my footing. I like that translation better. At 30, I found my footing. At 40, I was free of doubts. At 40, it says, I cleared away my doubts. Very interesting. At 50, I understood, this one said, the decrees of heaven. This one says, at 50, I knew the will of heaven. This is Tianming. I would translate this, I knew the patterns of the world. I knew how things were and worked, rather than heaven. Because heaven here doesn't mean capital H, it means the overarching patterns that govern reality. At 60, it says, my ear was obedient. And the other translation is, I was able to discern the truth. But I like the ear obedient. It means it was attuned. My ear was really attuned. I could tell when something was in tune and out of tune. I really, really like this. Because in these texts, the hearing organ is really a wonderful manifestation. Guan Yin uses the hearing mechanism. And you can learn a lot by closing your eyes and listening really closely. I could tell a story next week about Jacques Lucéran, who was the leader of the underground movement in France during World War II, and he's blind. And all the other groups had infiltration of Nazi informers in their underground movement, and only his group never had a Nazi informer. And that's because he conducted all the interviews to who got admitted to the group, but he was blind. So in other words, he was able to pick up something out of tune with his ear that the eyes would miss. It's very interesting. Anyhow, short story. So it says, my ear was receptive to the truth. And at 70, I could follow what my heart desired without transgressing what was right. Or at 70, I could follow my heart's desires without transgressing what's right. So here's a model of someone who at 15 decides, I'm going to cultivate this way. Life is short. There's nothing more important than doing this. And then he goes through a series of steps. He said, but at 15, I still had, I wasn't firm. One day I wanted to cultivate this, the next day I wanted to just go out and, eat, drink, and be merry. And I went back and forth. But by 30, my footing was firm. Okay, I'm going to do this. And then at 40, because of that, I worked through and got rid of all my doubts and misgivings. Doubts about the teachings, doubts about my teacher, and doubts about myself. This is the most important one. To doubt that I don't have the ability to become this way is the most crippling of doubts. Not having that doubt allows you to at least have a shot at it. But if you have the doubt that you can't, you stop yourself before you even try. So this is the thing of doubts. And then he said, at 50, my ear was attuned. At 50, I could understand the patterns of things. And this is what it means to understand how things work in the Buddhist sense, knowing how cause and effect works. I understand that cause and effect is the determining forces of the universe and my behavior, and therefore I'm not free from cause and effect, but I learn how to use it. I'm very careful about what I think and say and do because it rebounds to me and others. And then at 60, the ear then became attuned and I could hear it very naturally. I could see it. You could take the eye too. I could feel it kinesthetically, what was right. I knew when I walked into a situation, this is right, this is good, and this wasn't. I didn't have to think about it. This is what I'm saying. The sensible organs become faculties for acute steering that we can use. Our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, our kinesthetic sensibility. These are really powerful tools for cultivating by. And repressing them produces the opposite result. So you can't just let them all hang out, but repressing them not. You have to tune them, you have to refine them so they're really very, very skillful. This is where spiritual penetrations come from mastering the sense organs in this fine level attunement that's available to us just as humans, not to speak of gods. And then 70 says, I could then do what my heart desires and not transgress because I was so attuned. It doesn't start at 15, I could do what I wanted to. So there's a progress. So anyway, I present this as a model of cultivation that we can look at in our process. I was thinking about this tonight, and I think the new version is of the uncultivated. Okay, I came up with this. This is not the text, so please, apologies. Here's my version of you don't cultivate. At 15, I bet my mind on power, wealth, money, and sex. Okay? At 30, I abandoned all my ideals. I wasn't troubled by them anymore. At 40, I smothered my conscience. At 50, I knew how to manipulate people. At 60, well, you could do a number of things. At 60, I was in full swing, and I knew exactly how to go about doing what I wanted. And at 70, I could do whatever the hell I wanted to, and thought I could get away with it. And at 75, I died. Empty-handed, empty-hearted. So I'm using this as a contrast. It's somewhat facetious, but if you think about it, as people move through their lives, they do this measurement. At 15, I'm going to be a billionaire by the time I'm so on and so forth. I want to, many undergraduates now enter prestigious universities with that as at 15. At 16, I enter the university, and I want to be, a Steve Jobs or something by the time I'm 24 or 25. This one woman who was at Stanford, who did this phony pharmaceutical blood testing mechanism, what's her name?
Theranos is the company.
Huh? Louder. Elizabeth something. Holmes. And she, by the way, at 40, she was able to manipulate and get all these people hooked up. So you watch the trajectory. 15 sets her mind to do this. 30 drops her ideals. I'm going to make the world a better place. No, I'm just going to make this money. She starts dressing like Steve Jobs with all the black gear and whatnot. And mind is completely on the way, but the way of form, fortune and wealth and so forth. Then the conscience gets buried, no longer has any reservations, qualms, even though one knows. And I'm not singling her out, I'm just saying it's a trajectory whereby we sell our soul in some Faustian deal, hoping to get this and this and this. In the end, sort of as Faust does, the devil comes to collect, and the soul is gone. And therefore, manipulating others, knowing what others think and want, you're able to do this and get those false stocks out there. And then somehow you feel, as you mature and you arrive, you can get away with it and nobody's going to catch you. I can do what I want and nobody will see me. And I could think of a number of examples in the news today where 60 and 70-year-olds are being called to term because they thought they could get away from it or away with it. Oh, let's see, anybody in Hollywood? Oh, yeah, there was this case, okay? And so the idea is, but even if you get away with it at 70, in the realm of the patterns of the way things are, there's no getting away from it. Just as you don't get away from the living beings of your own nature, you don't get away from your own actions. So even though you might fool the world, in the end you end up, as this text would say and the Buddhist text would say, empty-handed with nothing and empty-hearted with no real merit and virtue. And this is real. The whole human life then has been wasted. So I just bring this as a contrast to say these ancient texts talk about a trajectory of how we might move our life along in a constructive way, but patiently, saying at 15 it says 30, 45, but you're gradually moving to something that's really noble and worthwhile. On the other hand, if you start out at 15 and you're off an inch at the beginning, that all I want to do is to have fame and fortune and wealth and power, then as you follow it, you're going to get further and further along. By the time you're 70, what Hui Nong says, you die in bitter regret. But then, as the Chinese say, Taiwan, too late. So this is a sort of cautionary thing. Anyhow, I go on further than I should have again. Next week we'll pick this up some more and talk about it and bring in other things. So I apologize that I didn't go slower. How's that? So any questions, comments? Okay, you have them. That's okay. Keep them. There is the ongoing health threat that's out there, and everybody here and in the association's trying to keep a very close eye on it. And we will continue to do the Friday night until we get some sense that it really isn't safe to have this small assembly, this gathering. But right now, it seems as if we're okay. We're very reluctant here at the monastery to shut everything down because it's one of the few places in the world that you have a portal to something that's just not the ordinary, mundane, blah, blah. And just to have a chance to sit down and meditate and look at a text like this in a living, breathing fashion is really, it's an essential function. People say non-essential. I think it's essential. For me, it's essential. You give me an opportunity by coming here for me to bone up on this a little more, and that's a real gift, because otherwise I'd be lazy too. That being said, we don't want to make it so that it is actually harmful, so we're going to keep an eye out on the public health reports and then whatnot and keep in touch. And if something happens where it's really not safe anymore, then we will cancel Friday night in person. Then I'll start doing it with this. Now, I've never done it with that before, and I'm a little leery about talking to this and that, because at least you guys give me this look like, what? And then I know I didn't make it. This doesn't do anything. So I may do one of Heng Sure's techniques. I'll put little puppets and on each of the cushions, you know. Yeah, and they'll be there, and I'll be talking to them. And I have, I'll do something like that. But I want to keep this going. As long as I'm able to do this, I want to keep the Avatamsaka going and alive in the world in a living way. So even though we can't maybe meet here, you'll still be able to, I guess, will that be online for anybody who's, okay. So that being said, if you have not signed up on the web, the mailing list to have your email address noted, so that if it comes up Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, we decide we can't hold the Friday night class, the mailing list will get you and you'll get a message. You won't have to drive all the way here. So if you're not on the list, I guess, Locke, would you be? Yeah, there's an actual person behind that wooden box. You've been wondering, I've been looking over, hallucinating, talking to some. No, there's actually somebody there. Get your name on that list. It's not to give you information, it's just to let you know if the class won't happen on a Friday night. And then if it starts up again, to let you know that. But I think that's the best way. But let's assume tonight that next Friday we'll continue to meet unless you hear otherwise. So any other thoughts or reports or on this? Yes? Announcements?
So just adding what you said, we still have classes going on every day. Tomorrow will be Avatamsaka Sutra lecture at 7:30. Heng Sure from Australia will be lecturing. It will be online transmission here. Because of this given conditions, we cancel for a while in our morning activities here. A morning Dharma assembly is no more. Until we will feel that it's safe to hold here this space for practice. And we don't have also communal lunch here tomorrow, like usually we have. But otherwise, we have meditation twice a day still going on. Other classes, Monday evening, Amelia Barini, Qigong and Yoga. Wednesday is Stephen Tainer, 7:30 p.m. Thursday, Berkeley Insight Meditation Communities, James Barras and other teachers from Spirit Rock. Friday, Marty. So if anything happened, we probably also will announce on our website. We kind of seeing and observing how situation progress and observing media and everything and make sure that the space is safe for you.
And we will try to keep this fact-based. I know there's some people that think that's a dying thing, facts, but we'd like to keep it fact-based and not even just what we call faith-based. So if there's a real actual thing going on that's threatening, facts, we will report that and let you know, and we'll act accordingly. We won't bury our head in the sand and pretend it's not there, because just for your information, because I was trained as a historian, some of you don't realize that there was a pandemic in 1918 to 1920 in the world, and a lot of people have forgotten that. At that time, anywhere from 60 to 100 million people died. And you're looking at a population that was half the size of what the world is now. 60 to 100 million people died. Over 900,000 in the United States alone. It came at the end of World War I. And basically it was just an H1N1 virus, flu virus. But what happened was major governments of the world just didn't want to have that bad news out there. Either to cause a panic or cause the markets to go down or blah, blah, blah. And so they didn't say anything, they hid it. And the thing about viruses and bacteria is that you can't hide them. I don't know what you're thinking. It's like, well, if I ignore you, you're not there. Or if I build a wall, you won't come in. I mean, that's really silly. But as a result, this spread virulently throughout the world. The only place that reported it accurately at the time was Spain. And therefore it got the bad name as the Spanish flu. So I'm just saying this is not unprecedented, but the foolishness of responding to it and pretending it's not there, whether it's from religious reasons or political reasons or economic reasons, just don't serve us. So we're not going to play around with this in that way. We try to be as honest as we can and report the facts, and you guys make your best decisions. But with all things, not acknowledging one's own living beings or the outside situation doesn't make it go away and doesn't make it better. So calling things as they are and facing up to them is a very important Buddhist principle, and we will try to honor that with this. So, and if you know something that we should know, please call the monastery, let the monks know, or send an email through to the site here and keep us informed. It's mutual. Okay? That being said, we are going to transfer all the goodness from this evening's gathering and none of the viruses universally out to all living beings.
Just ask, does the virus has Buddha nature?
Right. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise.
Bowing respect to the triple jewels.